Trade in pre-colonial Africa. Trade is the buying and selling of goods and services between people, countries or regions. African communities have engaged in trade since time immemorial. One important factor that facilitated trade in pre-colonial Africa was the existence of varying environmental and climatic conditions. The communities were not self-sufficient because they could only produce a limited variety and quantity of items depending on what was available in the environment. Moreover, there was local specialization. Different communities produced different kinds of foods or craft items. There was need to trade in order to get all the things the communities needed. For example, the Maasai gave the Gweno cattle in exchange for iron weapons. This way, the Maasai had weapons to use during wars with other communities. The Gweno in turn got cattle for milk, meat and leather. Methods of trade. Trade was carried out using barter or currency. Barter trade is whereby goods or services are exchanged for other goods of services. For example, the exchange of cattle for iron tools between the Maasai and Gweno was barter trade. In northern Tanzania, the Kisii traded their pots for food from the Pare and Chagga. The currency method of trade is whereby money is used. Money is something that is accepted as a measure of value by the people taking part in trade. In pre-colonial Africa, iron hose, rolls of cloth, cowrie shells, copper rods, salt and gold dust were some of the commodities used as money by different communities. Both local and regional trade took place in pre-colonial Africa. Local trade. In local trade, goods are exchanged between people living in the same geographical area such as a town or a village. In pre-colonial Africa, this type of trade usually took place between communities that produced different goods. For example, communities that lived in fertile areas produced a lot of food. Pastoral communities had a lot of cattle. Other groups were skilled in various crafts such as basketry, pottery or ironworking. Pastoral communities like the Maasai needed vegetables and grains from cultivators like the Nyakyusa and the Chagga. There was regular trade between the Luo and Abagusii. The Luo had goods such as livestock and dairy products, pots, drums, baskets and colourful headdresses which they exchanged for the Abagusii's iron implements, jewellery, grain, soapstone and carvings. In Uganda, the Banyoro supplied salt and iron items such as hoes, knives and spears to their neighbours. The Baganda, on the other hand, supplied bark cloth and bananas. Impact of local trade. 1. Local trade strengthened the bonds between people within the same area. This was further enhanced by intermarriage and other social relations arising from the trade. In the Bunyoro Empire in Central Africa, the Acholi, Aller, Itizo, Langi, Basoga, Cumani, Banyankole, Baganda and Congolese interacted as a result of trade. 2. Through local trade, the requirements of the communities such as tools, weapons, foodstuffs and medicinal herbs were met. 3. Local trade also enabled communities to access new products. People could get the commodities that they did not produce from communities that produced them. For example, pastoral communities, whose staple diet was milk, meat and blood, learned how to eat vegetables from their agricultural neighbors. 4. Transport routes were also improved as a result of local trade. This happened as the communities traveled frequently to trade. 5. Some important market centers emerged along the market routes. For instance, the Maasai of Western Kilimanjaro and Loitokitok had border markets every 10 days. 6. In Bunyoro, there were royal markets that were began by the king. These markets were attended by people from all over the kingdom. The king's officers collected taxes from the marketplace. This was an important source of revenue for the king. 7. Local trade encouraged communities to expand production. This was because even when surplus was produced, the communities would still get a market for it. Regional trade. Regional trade refers to trade between two distinct geographical regions. This trade involves a larger geographical area and a wider variety of goods compared to local trade. Examples of regional trade in pre-colonial Africa were the trans-Saharan trade in North and West Africa and the long-distance trade carried out by the Wanyamwezi of Tanzania and the Akamba of Kenya. Among the Shona in Zimbabwe, regional trade involved the exchange of gold, copper and ivory in return for textiles, crockery, guns and other goods from the Portuguese and other foreigners along the coast. The Kamba interest in trade came about mostly because they lived in an area with unreliable rainfall. They therefore had to go out in search of food often. As a result, the Kamba began to exchange poisoned arrows and iron items for food from their close neighbors such as the Jirima, Rabe, Kikuyu and Embu. From here, they extended their activities to new areas and thus got involved in regional trade. The Kamba were leading long-distance traders in the 19th century. By the 1800s they were already conducting trade between the interior of Kenya and the east coast of Africa. This trade made Mombasa the most prosperous town in the region. The Kamba caravans brought ivory, rhinoceros horns, gum, hides and beeswax from the interior in return for cloth, salt, copper, cowrie shells and jewellery from the coastal traders. The most famous Kamba trader was Chief Kivoi. In the 1830s and 1840s, Kivoi became a very successful trader and hunter. He organized large caravans that acquired trade goods from Mount Kenya region and around Mount Kilimanjaro and took the items to the coast. There they exchanged those commodities with items from Arab and Swahili traders. However, by the 1860s the Kamba position in this trade had begun to decline. This was largely because the coastal traders, mainly the Arabs and Swahili, were beginning to penetrate the interior. The Yao. Initially, the Yao were farmers and they needed iron hoes in order to cultivate their farms. However, only the Kisii clan among the Yao knew how to make these hoes. Yao traders got beads and cloth from Kilwa and exchanged these items for iron hoes from the Kisii. Later, these hoes were used to get other items along the trade routes. In Tanganyika, Yao and Nyamwezi took part in long-distance trade. In the 19th century, the Yao participated in this trade by capturing and selling slaves from neighboring communities. In exchange they got beads, glass, cloth and guns from the coastal traders. The Yao chiefs such as Mpanda, Madaka, Machemba and Mtalika encouraged this practice as they sought to expand their chiefdoms. The gains from the long-distance trade enabled them to get better weapons with which to conquer new regions. Yao's love for travel and trade kept the Arab and Swahili traders from the interior of Tanganyika during the 19th century. This is how the Yao involvement in regional trade began. Fun fact: in the 19th century, Chief Madaka I of the Yao became very wealthy due to regional trade. He is said to have had over 600 wives. The Nyamwezi. Regional trade among the Nyamwezi involved conducting the exchange of commodities between the interior of Tanganyika and the coast. The Nyamwezi were the most successful long-distance traders in Tanganyika in the 19th century. The Nyamwezi traders succeeded due to the following factors. 1. There existed a variety of trade items such as ivory, hides and rhinoceros horns in the region. 2. Nyamwezi leaders such as Mziri, Nyanguyama and Mirambo supported this trade. They helped to finance and provide security along the trade routes in their territories. 3. Nyamwezi were centrally placed on the route to the coast. They could take advantage of the demand for copper from Katanga, salt from Uvinza, iron ore from Usangi and Mtunze, and the imports found at the coast. 4. There was a high demand for trade items such as ivory, and later slaves, along the coast and a reciprocal demand for items from the coast in the interior. 5. Local trade already existed between various groups in the region. This formed the foundation for the long-distance trade. 6. The prosperity of Zanzibar from around 1800 AD contributed to the development of this trade. The Nyamwezi organized trading caravans which supplied ivory to the Zanzibaris. By the 1830s, there were three main trade routes that passed through Nyamwezi. Country. 1. The southern route which linked the port towns of Makindani, Kilwa Kivinje and Lindi to the interior. It went as far as Lake Nyasa, Lake Malawi, Zambia. and the Democratic Republic of Congo. 2. The central route which linked the Bagamoyo and Sotani ports with the interior. It went through Gogo country before it reached Wanyamwezi. From there it split into 3. One branch went to Ujiji on the shores of Lake Tanganyika and on to Katanga in the Congo Basin. B. A second branch went towards Uganda. It went as far as Karagwe, Bunyoro and Buganda. C. The third branch went towards Lake Nyasa. It ended in the areas to the north and west of the lake. 3. The northern route which began at the ports of Mombasa, Tanga and Pangani. It went through Chagga and Maasai country and ended at Lake Victoria. One of its branches went towards Lake Baringo and Lake Turkana in Kenya. The central route was the largest and busiest one. It was the one known by most European travelers and missionaries. As a result, new crops such as rice, maize and cassava were introduced along this route. Traders from the coast brought cloth, beads, wire and guns. Initially, the trade involved the exchange of ivory from the interior in return for imports such as textiles and guns from the coast. However, trade in ivory brought the Wanyamwezi into contact with slave traders from the coast. Arabs had started clove plantations in Zanzibar and Pemba and they needed slaves to work in these plantations. In addition, the Arabs had contacts with European, Indian and American traders who wanted slaves for their plantations abroad. Consequently, by the 1830s slaves had become a very important trade item. The Wanyamwezi acquired guns from the coastal traders. They used these guns to raid other communities and get slaves. Due to this trade, Arab traders made Tabora in Wanyamwezi their base. Chief Mirambo benefited greatly from this arrangement. During his reign in 1860 to 1884, the Arab traders were forced to pay tribute to him. By the end of the 19th century, Arabs were blocking Wanyamwezi traders from the coastal towns. They set high taxes for the Wanyamwezi and favored Arab and Swahili traders. This led to a decline in the Wanyamwezi long-distance trade. Impact of the regional trade in East Africa. Regional trade in East Africa had both positive and negative consequences. Positive consequences. 1. Some traders in the region became extremely wealthy and powerful. These included Chiefs Kivoi of the Akamba, Madaka 1 Street of the Luo and Mirambo of the Wanyamwezi. The East African two communities were able to acquire new commodities from outside the region, for example cloth, glassware, guns and wire from the Middle Eastern Europe. 3. A number of urban centers emerged along the trade routes, including Sotani, Pangani, Bagamoyo, Tabora, Ujiji, Voi and Taveta. 4. Trade routes became established. These routes linked different regions in East Africa. For example, the Wanyamwezi trade route from Ujiji to Bagamoyo via Tabora became the busiest trade route in East Africa in the 19th century. 5. Some African traders established powerful empires in different parts of the continent. These included Chief Kivoi of the Akamba, Chief Mziri of the Wanyamwezi, who settled in Katanga, and Chief Mirambo, who united several Wanyamwezi chieftaincies to create a large kingdom. 6. Many people in the East African region interacted as a result of the trade. For example, the Akamba people established blood brotherhood relation with the Mijikenda in order to enhance the trade. Other relations were established through intermarriage. Chief Mirambo established friendly relations with Tippu Tip, a famous Arab trader, and Sultan Bargash bin Said of Zanzibar. 7. New food crops such as maize, rice and cassava were introduced in the interior of East Africa as a result of regional trade. Negative consequences. 1. Some communities invaded others in order to get slaves for the trade. For example, Chief Madaka I of the Luo attacked many of his neighbors in order to acquire slaves. These raids caused insecurity and the loss of innocent lives. 2. Slave raids also caused enmity between communities. Wars increased in the region as groups raided each other and competed for trade commodities. 3. Some communities became preoccupied with slave raiding activities at the expense of other work. For example, some Ngoni people became mercenaries, ruga, and they worked for whoever could pay for their services. 4. Foreigners used the trade routes to reach the interior. These included colonialists and commercial agents who wanted to exploit the region's resources. 5. Since slaves were a major trade commodity, many people were enslaved in East Africa. This led to depopulation and underdevelopment in some areas. 6. Many elephants were killed as ivory was in great demand.